Ben, welcome.
Thank you. Well, nice to see everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night to everybody on this call.
Yeah, we're certainly from all around the world. And so let's start the ball rolling, Ben. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Ipsos and the responsibilities and how it all kind of works?
Well, I mean, I'm not doing 20,000 people's work for them. So, I mean, my job is just to try and help focus the strategy of the company, troubleshoot occasionally, and also, of course, and very importantly, make sure the right people are in the right jobs around the world, as well as a few pet projects that I get very interested in, one of which, of course, would be our tech and AI. But we have a great chief operating officer who's doing that on a day-to-day basis. I think the other thing that perhaps people don't appreciate is that, most people on this call are working in market research. So you will have to try and keep often your clients, internal or external, happy, and also, of course, your people. But one of the big differences about being in a reasonably large public limited company, a PLC, is that another audience you suddenly get at this stage is the investment community and the board. And so you're sort of playing chess on a number of levels, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben, the focus of today's webinar is obviously AI. So one of the big questions for today is, what impact do you think AI is likely to have on insights and research over the next 3 years?
Well, I think it's similar in some ways to the arrival of the internet, or it feels like it at the moment. So you saw, large areas of work shifting, some work just becoming, I mean, if you look at some of the DIY tools that the internet enabled in research, there are things that research agencies used to do that have been replaced by SurveyMonkey or just by software companies. And I think we will see elements of that again. And so we will either need to own those tools or those companies, or we won't be doing it ourselves anymore. And that may be fine. There are lots of things we used to do that we don't do anymore, but it's certainly disruptive. I mean, you can see it happening in basic qual now. You can, and you're going to talk about that later today on this podcast. But certainly, it's removing whole areas of activity or automating various areas of activities. It's also incredibly early days. I think this is the other thing, and I don't think, we know that you can't predict the future. So, it feels very, very disruptive, but some of the things that we try out, we will probably decide actually aren't quite ready yet. We'll talk about synthetic data, I suspect. But yeah, it certainly is disruptive, and we embraced it at Ipsos because we wanted to be the disruptor rather than be disrupted, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. And we will have time for questions from the audience to Ben. So if you want to be typing those in, you've got a better chance of coming at the top of the list. Thinking about end clients, you talked about the different stakeholders, but end clients, what are the variations you're seeing in how they're adopting, not adopting, challenging different AI initiatives?
I think generally, if you're looking at the CMI function, which is one of the core clients for agencies, a lot of them are, want to use the new tools, want to get up to speed. Actually, often because they don't have 20,000 employees typically, they also perhaps want to work with people in the industry who are trying out things. So I think there's real curiosity. CMI functions are under endless pressure internally to get answers faster and cheaper. And so here is another way, in theory, to do that. In some industries, law, banking, we actually have, and even chemicals, we sometimes have clients who actually want us to guarantee we won't use AI on their projects, partly because of security or security concerns, although we've got a sandboxed system that's completely firewalled, that they will want to know, just you to guarantee that you haven't used AI. So but overall, I think people are experimenting like crazy and wanting of course to use it as another DIY tool. And there's the DIY movement in the CMI function is alive and well and stronger than ever with AI tools, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the SMR study, which runs every couple of years, indicates about 50% of projects are run client side, not 50% of value, but in terms of numbers of projects. It's a really big sector now.
Yeah. No, I mean, because the things that you had to use a telephone survey for in the 1980s, now you know don't need to do that anymore. So you can literally just go and post a few questions, and I think now with the large language models, if they're decent, and there are good ones there, if you just wanted to, I was talking to some management consultants yesterday. I was saying, you wanted to look at what the general public think about management consultants. Again, 20 years ago, you might have done some done some focus groups or something. Now you can quickly go and get a large language model to sort of review vast amounts of literature, newspapers, blogs, etc., and it will give you a sort of a pretty good sense of the pros and cons of management consultants, for example.
I mean, Ben, you touched on a few things that, clients are asking for or asking for you not to do. And noting like it's still early days, are you starting to sense that AI might bring about changes in sort of the traditional agency client relationship or ways of working together?
Well, I think it will continue to drive DIY, and so agencies will be doing more difficult, complex things in the same way that if you look at the evolution of call centers, they started off being a new channel, then they became the mainstream way in which people dealt with companies, and now, of course, because of automation and the web, call centers are now often reserved for dealing with problems and complex things, a bit like face-to-face interviewers. We still have face-to-face interviewers in many countries. 1 in 3 people on this planet are not online, and therefore you need those people to go and find those hard to reach, difficult to find people. So there'll be a role, but it will probably become more specialized, more niche. Simple stuff, people will ever more ably be able to do it themselves.
And you've segued quite nicely into one of our next questions. And overseeing a global company, you're probably in a relatively strong position to make some commentary around, how AI is being adopted around the world. Do you see differences at this stage between, say, Asia Pacific, Africa, LATAM, and North America?
I mean, the most dramatic is simply China because of the Great Firewall. So if anybody's been to China and tried to use an AI platform there without a special VPN, which again the Chinese government is trying to discourage, you'll find that it's incredibly slow. So China is becoming a walled garden. But otherwise, I mean, obviously America, the UK, Europe, heavy adoption. It's hard to generalize. I think there's great examples out in Asia, both inside my own company and actually many of our clients. Again, because you've got young tech-enabled societies there. So no, it's hard to. I'd find it hard to generalize. I mean, we know attitudinally that Asian countries, for example, are more enthusiastic about it than Anglo-Saxons. And Anglo-Saxons are a bit more worried about potential job losses, etc. But in terms of actual adoption inside our agency, it's pretty much everywhere. But the notable one is where you're trying to work on a global system through the Great Firewall.
So I'm just going to pick up on that lead there, Ben. What are Ipsos doing about tackling this? You've got a chance here to talk about the rather advanced project that you've got running, because I think it's really interesting that of the major agencies, you are probably the most public tool out that's being used internally.
Yeah, well, we created Ipsos Facto early on in very short. I mean, when OpenAI launched in the autumn of 22, it was very obvious to me that this was going to be something that we have to get behind very quickly. So early in the first half of 2023, we launched Ipsos Facto, which is our internal sandbox that's got all of our now got all of our back data in it for various fields, and all of the social media that we've mined over X period, and of course about 13 different large language model tools. And so what I wanted was people internally to start getting familiar with this, and we've now got prompt libraries for different parts of the business. So yes, we saw it early on as something that we absolutely needed to get behind. And I think this is where actually being reasonably large gives you some advantages, because you've got more people to work on a prompt to try and, I don't know, analyze a quant survey or something. If you've only got 200 members of staff, then it will take you perhaps longer than if you've got thousands of people who are iterating on something. But you need to make sure you're not duplicating effort, of course, as well. So no, we got behind it. We've got many products now that try and do different things. Signals AI, which I think was being talked about by L'Oreal SMR, which is, you know, analyzing back vast volumes of social media data to look for new insights. And that is something that is, the ability to now do that in a relatively creative way is amazing. Inno Explorer is another one. So yes, we built those products with our different businesses and rolled them out, because I think it's partly experimental, but it's also, we can just see that it's fast. It's just much, you know, it really is fast, and it gives you access and use of data in ways that were just not easily possible before. So yeah, we're dead keen on it. I do think we need to be at the same time pretty wary about hallucination if you're letting it go mine data from anywhere, and making sure that you do actually understand what it's doing and how replicable it is. Because if it's just obviously a guessing machine each time of a probabilistic, you know, are you going to get the same answer again? So again, you need to test for all of these things, and it will be the same with synthetic data.
So we've got a sorry, Sue.
Well, I was going to ask the second of the questions there, because it fits with Ben talking about Ipsos's tools. Do you see as research-specific AI tools being a future SaaS offering from Ipsos and others?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, we will offer Ipsos Facto to our clients for them to use, and we're already, I think there's already one major client that's got it and is using it for its own data. And I think there will be, I suspect, bespoke models for different things. I could see a qual model as opposed to a quant model, for example, that did different things. And that will be, you know, that will be more and more, I think, important, particularly as we start to try and mine the back data. You know, this is the one of the things that we and some of the other large players have, of course, because we've got decades of information that previously have been relatively hard to access. You can now, of course, build that into the model. It can absorb it. And that will give you an advantage because other people won't have that. It's a bit like the AI companies themselves having to do deals with newspaper groups because they've run out of material in the wild to train the AI on. So suddenly, you know, if you want to go back and read every single back copy of a newspaper going back to X, they're not all available online, but that stuff does exist somewhere. And so I think actually researchers should not underestimate the value of our own archives.
I'm going to jump in now to, sorry, Sue.
I was going to say, well, that question actually leads really nicely into the other one, but I'll let you ask that one.
Okay, thanks. So we've got a question in the chat, synthetic data, which you've alluded to a couple of times, Ben, increasingly being used in research. What is your position on it? And how much of an impact is it likely to have? And how will this link to regular primary data collection?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the simple answer is we don't know. And anybody who says they can tell you what's going to be happening with synthetic data in 10 years' time is probably smoking the wrong type of tobacco. What I would say is that, you know, I think there's imputation, and we've always done imputation as an industry. You know, you will remember papers on hot deck imputation from, I think, the 1990s or even before, where we've got missing variables or we want to try and work out in larger sample. So I think it should be really helpful there. We still need to be extremely careful, because if you've got a sample that's got a massive skew already in the, let's take an example of young black people who are hard to get to fill in surveys in many countries. You've already, so the ones you get are already probably not quote unquote normal. You can go and dispute this. And then you're going to go and try and do some other extrapolation from these already not normal ones where you're missing loads of cases. I think where we will be doing a lot of experimentation. So we'll be doing work on that. And obviously we will start doing work where we know we go and we do a survey on a subject where we sort of know the likely range of answers because we've asked the questions each year for the last 20 years or something like that. We'll ask the AI to go and create the same answers and see what it can do and match it. I think where I'm skeptical at the moment is AI responding accurately to stimulus that have never existed before. And so the creation in political polling, for example, which is something I know a little bit about, one of the way political polling tends to work is that empirically it corrects for the biases that we've known that have existed in the past. So in France, for example, one of the ways to correctly predict how many people the right-wing Front National party was going to get was by taking whatever you got in a telephone survey and doubling it, because people didn't want to admit that they were voting for them. Now, actually, the dynamic has now changed, and people are very happy to admit that they're voting for Marine Le Pen. And so what would have worked as a way of creating the right answer 10 or 15 years ago is no longer correct. And so I think this is my question. If we come up with a completely new category or a new political party, will the AI be able to predict how people would react to that? But for many things, we may be able to, and I think, again, we will need to see the empirical evidence be able to accurately do this. I do think we need to be very mindful of things like likely margins of error, etc. Because I can just see us, what I'm terrified of in a way is synthetic data using other synthetic data to create more synthetic data. And at some point, we have credibility problems.
So just to come to the last part of that question, Ben, what impact do you think this is going to have on primary data collection?
I think there will be less. I think there will be less primary data collection. I might also say that one would hope that it might become higher quality, because if the synthetic data is so good, then you would want to make sure that you had really good data going into that model. So, you did have some people who don't like doing online surveys in your model, for example, and that might be quite useful. So we'll see. I think it also, offline data actually becomes, in this world where everything's online, potentially becomes more valuable. Really, to understand India, they speak, we interview in up to 37 different languages in India. A quarter of the population are illiterate. They ain't there in a lot of online surveys about India. If you think you can sit at your desk in London or New York and really understand the Indian market, well, maybe, but maybe you actually ought to go there and have a look. So I think actually, bizarrely, offline stuff may also become valuable in a world where sort of surface level stuff is more easily accessible.
Sue.
Okay, I'm just perusing the questions and waiting to see if you were going to jump in too. Ben, somebody's asking about how you manage data ownership issues when you're using your back data.
Yeah.
Are you having to keep that within specific client silos, or have you got broader arrangements?
We've got, well, I mean, we have, because we do a lot of work that's published, so we have a lot of published work, and we also, of course, have all the work that we do ourselves. So things like Ipsos Global Trends, which, we've been doing for the last decade, all of that, hundreds of thousands and thousands and thousands of sample, etc. We can just load into it. So we've got all that data that's ours, that we have collected for free-to-air polling, that we've put out there. Where you've got obviously very specific data for a client, and this is where it gets, if you've got a particular client, one of the big CPG companies, yes, get your lawyers to go and talk to their lawyers. You'll find that they both have a great time and you won't hear much from them for some time. When I've talked to clients about it from places like P&G and Unilever, I think there is, again, I think the industry will work out general protocols on that. Often you will find that people are interested in expanding category knowledge together, and they might collaborate, but they wouldn't necessarily want to obviously put their stuff about their particular product into something. I think the other thing to remember, however, and this is still an evolving area, I would say, and an evolving area for lawyers as well, quite frankly. So of course we're being cautious. Nobody wants to get involved in try and avoid lawyers as much as possible. Hello to my legal department, you're all great people. But where you've got, there's a lot of data that's out there that you can use. We have a lot of data that we can use. I think if you're working with an individual client, of course, you need to then be very specific about which of their data is going to be loaded in. But the point I was trying to make is that when it comes to things like scoring advertising or scoring innovations or even scoring politicians, we've been doing that with aggregate data from individual surveys. So clients might buy, they want a comparison of how effective their ad is in terms of memorability or something. We've been in a sense doing aggregate anonymized data from those type of studies, those scores, for a long time. The question now is, could you share the detailed respondent level data behind that average score that was added in to allow you to benchmark yourself against other competing type of ads in your sector, shall we say? So there is there's norms that are widely used across the industry already. They're used as sort of headline percentages. What's the likability of this? Now we're talking about the interesting question with the lawyers, which I don't think is fully resolved, is can we also look at the data underneath that, the sort of respondent level data? And that is still, I think, a grey area, to be quite honest. So we will always be very transparent with clients about what is or isn't being used, but we have a large volume of our own data that we can use.
We're almost out of time and there are lots of questions. That's a shame, as is always, but I'm going to finish with just one very quick one. If the very first time I saw you was when you were coming up to present to Nottinghamshire County Councillor,
God
because you're a
bless
good
you.
deal younger than me. Thinking back to those sort of days, somebody that sort of age and in our industry now, what should they be focusing on?
Well, I still believe that you should actually understand where your data comes from. And I know this is a slightly old-fashioned view, but I am from the 20th century. So knowing, and the core skills of designing decent questions, understanding biases in how people answer questions, all of this good stuff. I mean, okay, you can assume you get your samples from the internet and they're perfect if you like, but I personally still want to have some idea about where this data comes from and what it might or might not be representative of. Having said that, I think just being much more flexible, you should be able to, I think, as always, trying out different things, getting comfortable with the tools. 30 years ago, getting comfortable with PowerPoint would help you in your career. Now it will be prompt engineering and how to use these different large language models. But generally, trying new things, and the main thing is, of course, being open to opportunities and saying yes to things. And if you do that and you keep going, you will do well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your
Pleasure.
time, Ben. You've
Thanks,
been very
Ben.
generous with it, and it's been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.